I'm Carl King, and this is the Carl King Podcast, where I talk about music, filmmaking, and general creativity stuff. And hey, that's my music playing right now. To support this podcast, head over to Patreon and join for just $1 or $5 per month. Quick shout out to my music endorsements: Vienna Symphonic Library, Fractal Audio, Ernie Ball Strings, Toontrack, and Millennium Media. All 5 companies make amazing musical gear that I love to use. Now let's get ready to start to begin. Well, it is hotter than usual here. It got up above 100 F today. F as in F, it's hot. Chewbode came up with that joke. Anyway, I'm in my studio in Los Angeles, Plosive Central, and I have some incredible news. Plosive Central has been painted. The color is called Dark Storm Cloud, and I'll be sharing a photo of that specific color on the Carl Kingdom blog for this episode, so be on the lookout for that. And here's some good news. We have reached 21 patrons on Patreon. Folks, I am blown away by this. Thank you. It definitely feels good. Been trying to improve some things over there. Like I've updated the descriptions of what people get for the various tiers. And there's also a new video trailer, so go check that out. P.S. Chewbode and Hank Howard III are still in a brutal bidding war for my friendship. So I've decided to bring back a primitive, traditional manner of settling disagreements. And it is something called a fart contest. Now, I can't really explain the rules of a fart contest because, well, you know. But in the meantime, we're going to try to raise the funds to make it happen live on the podcast. I know, it makes some of you listeners uncomfortable, but, no pun intended, my lawyer assures me a fart contest is the only option we have left. Anyway, speaking of Patreon, I also posted an old Dr. Zoltan creation called What is Wrong with the Human Race? Back in 2007, I asked that question, what is wrong with the human race? And 100 humans, many of them MySpace users, responded. So Dr. Zoltan published their answers. It's actually a PDF, I think it's 20-something pages, and it's available to Patreon subscribers of the $5 level and up. In other news, my first CD, Sir Millard Mulch's 50 Intellectually Stimulating Themes from a Cheap Amusement Park for Robots and Aliens Volume 1, has finally been approved for digital distribution through TuneCore. But the problems continue. There has been a catastrophic error with the song titles, and you can see them all over Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. It is a nightmare. Here's what happened, to the best of my understanding. Back in 2005 or so, I renamed and released around 20 of those Sir Millard Mulch tracks as a digital album called Fanatical Video Game Retroverse. And it had a bunch of crazy song titles. And the way that I came up with those song titles was this. I asked Chewbode, his cheap moves, and Level Nivello to type up a huge list of absurd song names. So I took that list and I completely randomly assigned them to the tracks. Well, I unpublished that release a while back. And when I recently entered all the song titles for the original 50 CD with their correct original titles, some part of TuneCore's system identified the audio as being songs from Fanatical Video Game Retroverse, and it reassigned all of those stupid names and distributed the songs everywhere. I contacted TuneCore about it, and they are not owning up to the mistake, and they now want me to log back into their site and re-enter all of the correct song names again. But as Nigel Tufnell said, I'm a professional, I'll rise above it. Here's another tidbit that freaked me out. Ian Punnett, you ever heard of Ian Punnett? Well, he is my favorite current host of Coast to Coast AM, that show I listen to all the time. Anyway, he followed me on Twitter this weekend. I have no idea why he did that, but I am super intimidated now because I've been listening to him on the radio for like 20 years. I love his episodes, which are super solid, and that guy is sharp. So now he might see what I'm writing on Twitter. Oh, talk about stage fright. And last bit of news, a Tetris documentary series scoring update. I am just about to start the full official scoring of episode 1. We're in the process of locking the episode down with a temp piano track, and next comes all the tracks of banjo and inflamed uvula. But what does that mean to you? It means there's going to be a ton of new video game music for my Patreon patrons to hear. There's going to be something like 4 hours worth. By the way, I'm going to post the full temp piano sketch of episode 1 that I just assembled today inside Patreon. So go give it a listen if you like MIDI piano, especially about 36 minutes of MIDI piano. All right, now let's do some Carl King film reviews. Now, I've only got 2 film reviews this week, but I promise they will fit equally into the space of 3. It's kind of a hemiola, or is it hemiola, for the music theory nerds out there. If you get that joke without having to look it up, let me know. Here we go. First up, we've got Prey, directed by Dan Trachtenberg, who also directed 10 Cloverfield Lane. That was a good one with John Goodman and Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Prey stars Amber Midthunder, who was also in one of my favorite TV shows of all time called Legion. Well, go look that one up. And since we think screenwriters are important around here at this Carl King podcast, Prey was screenwrited by Patrick Ason. Now, I looked up Patrick Ason, and coincidentally, he has a credit as a consultant on Legion, although most of his other credits are as a TV producer. Okay, digging into the review, this movie did not have a ton of dialogue. There were plenty of slow scenes, and I actually mean that in a good way. It really took its time. It was what I would call cinematic. And after about 21 minutes in, I made a note to myself that I was starting to feel that this movie is a little bit of a video game. But hey, it's an action movie. I don't know why I went into it expecting something different. And a lot of people love action movies. They want that adrenaline. They want all the fighting and explosions. You know, they get high off of it. But Carl King doesn't need any of that. So when I realized, oh man, I'm watching an action movie, I no longer felt intrigued by what might happen next. I mean, basically, they're hunting a bad guy in the woods. So what surprising thing can really happen? We probably know where this is all going. Spoiler alert, Amber Midthunder's character and some other Comanche warriors are out in the wilderness hunting. And they think they're hunting a lion, but we find out it's not a lion. Now, this is a basic adventure movie. You've got a good guy and a bad guy, but we have a different aesthetic here. It's an aspiring female Comanche warrior versus an evil skull-collecting demon from outer space. Now, that's a new combination. But at the core, this whole story could have been swapped out for a knight against a dragon or a coyote against a roadrunner, because it's really just a simple battlefield story. The only thing that changes on the surface is the costumes. You know, you could dress them up however you want because the structure is there. And there's not much else to Prey's plot other than the B-story of Amber Midthunder's character proving that she is a warrior. But this is a movie with modern cultural relevance because, you know, lots of people are happy to see a Native American, especially a Native American woman, in the lead role of such a big franchise. So that's pretty cool that they were able to make that happen. And regarding the Predators, I'm sure this has been pointed out before, but boy, their cloaking technology is pretty crappy, isn't it? I mean, half the time you can still see them there, and the other half the time it totally malfunctions and shuts off. You know, many times throughout the movie, Amber Midthunder's character actually has face-to-face run-ins with the Predator, but conveniently, every time, something will interrupt them and she's able to run off and escape. I mean, because if they went at it right away, the movie would have been over in the first encounter. But it did feel a bit like the plot was being forced along by that. Oh, and here's something. Sarah Schachner did the musical score. And that brings us to another crazy coincidence. Or maybe there are no coincidences. I attended a film composing panel discussion thing years ago in LA, and during the Q&A, I even got to ask Sarah Schachner a question about her NASA Cassini scoring project, which she did with a bunch of analog synthesizers. Anyway, guess who was on the panel discussion sitting right next to her? That's right, you guessed it. Jeff Russo. You're like, Jeff Russo? Okay, well, maybe you didn't guess it, but Jeff Russo happens to be the composer for the TV show called Legion. Yeah, you knew it was going to be Legion again, didn't you? See how this all comes back to Legion? Now, I think there's more going on than we are being told. Maybe Ian Punnett can explain it. Okay, so back to the Prey review. There are a few moments of bald exposition, with the characters stating facts out loud. And there's actually a scene where Amber Midthunder's co-star turns to her and says something like, "We have to run." Oh, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And the whole monsters roaring and screaming was a bit much. Like, how many times do we need to see that? Because I had barely recovered from all of that roaring and screaming in Jurassic World, whatever it's called. But I was thinking about it, and what else are monsters going to do when they make an entrance in a movie? I mean, they're just going to stand there? I don't really have a better suggestion, so we're going to stick with all the roaring and screaming for a while, I guess. Okay, so how much can Carl King really complain about this Prey movie? Well, it did have a fresh take on the Predator franchise, and Amber Midthunder did a super job in the role, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to love it. So I gave this movie 4 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd, because it was definitely better than average. Up next, oh boy, Crimes of the Future. Holy crap. This one was written and directed by David Cronenberg. That's the guy who brought us Videodrome, Existenz, and for the old folks listening, a movie called The Fly in 1986, starring Jeff Goldblum. You remember that one? Now, I think if you watch The Fly, you would be able to tell, yeah, this is the same creative universe going on here. And it's true, this dude is still making those movies. Anyway, Crimes of the Future stars Viggo Mortensen and Léa Seydoux, who have been in a zillion, and I actually counted them, they have been in a zillion movies, or films, or whatever. And get this, Kristen Stewart is in this one too. Now, you might remember her from the Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas. But in this movie, she was cast perfectly in the role of a nervous government bureaucrat named Timlin. And a lot of the characters had like singular one-word names like that. Now, if you're paying attention, you might know that this movie is confusingly named the same as a movie he made in 1970. That's over 50 years ago. But this movie, I think, has nothing to do with that movie. So that's kind of like if a band decided to go back and reuse one of their album names for a completely different album. What a crazy idea. Now I'm watching this thing and I see that it starts out with lots of production company logos. It's a production in association with production productions. And you know what that means? It means it's a kind of independent artsy film, and they pulled together many different investors to make it all happen. And Carl King is glad they did. Right off the bat, I loved the musical score. I looked it up, and it turns out it was provided by Howard Shore. And guess what other movie he scored? Well, lots of movies, but he also scored The Fly. And that makes me wonder, how did he get this gig? As I was watching this movie, I found myself saying, "What the F?" out loud, repeatedly throughout. Each time a new element was introduced, like revealing another aspect of this bizarre fictional universe, they did not ease into it. No, sir. By the way, I'm noticing it's harder to write a review of a film I actually like. It's just so much easier to point out all of the technical problems in mainstream movies. But I loved Crimes of the Future. And what did I like about it? Well, first of all, as Carl King always says, many of the scenes had barely any dialogue, which is a huge, huge relief to me. The characters took the time to think about things, react, look at each other, read each other's emotions, and much of the dialogue was really unexpected. As it was moving along, I'd be like, well, what would a character usually say? What is this person about to say? And Cronenberg will go in the complete opposite direction and have them say something that you were definitely not expecting. It amazed me that the characters really did behave as if this twisted world Cronenberg created is totally normal. Like, they rarely explained all of the oddities. It's like, okay, this is happening now. Huh. Well, all right. And I love that feeling of a high-quality, mysterious film that seduces you rather than just telling you everything up front. I tend to enjoy it better without all of the talking and explanations. But we did get a few big exposition scenes. And you know what? It was all right with me because the acting was so good and the world was so strange, I just didn't mind it. Now, this is for the screenwriting nerds out there. I'll tell you this. Almost an hour into the movie, there is almost zero conflict. If you look at it, all of the characters pretty much get along, and also there is no huge goal. Yet, I was still fascinated and watching and just wondering what's going to happen next. So take that, all you writer bullies who think a movie needs to have a clear, specific, attainable goal, a good guy and a bad guy. Cronenberg just says, forget intention and obstacle. Let's just get weird here with this weird as heck weird movie. Now, regarding the location of the story, like, where did this take place? You never really see the city they're in. There's never really a wide shot or a big establishing shot. So it could be a small town, because we only see a few beat up buildings in a kind of dystopian future. So you can't tell what year it is or what the rest of the world is like. Are we in the United States? I guess we are, but it's all just so nondescript. And I don't recall seeing any other modern technology like cell phones or computers. So in a way, it was really retro, almost like it could be maybe the 1940s. Because it feels as if a war took place some years ago and, maybe society has been rebuilding after that. Like, for instance, there's a huge rusted ship, like a ship that goes in the ocean and it's just partially destroyed and it's fallen over on its side. And some of the characters will hang around it and talk with that ship in the background. But it's never explained why it's there. And the only technology they do seem to have in that world is somehow like alive, and it interfaces with their bodies in this creepy way. So I'm watching this movie, and part of the way through, I had this realization, like checking in with myself, like, wow, I cannot believe David Cronenberg came up with this premise and took it this far. Like, these actors are just sticking with it, committed to it, and making it all happen. They really did this thing, which is just a crazy accomplishment. I looked it up on IMDb, and they supposedly spent $35 million making this movie. And their gross worldwide sales is only $3.4 million, which I guess is a tenth of what they spent. Now, does that make it a financial failure? Are those numbers accurate? Does anybody know? Anyway, back to the review. I don't know if this counts as a spoiler. Maybe it does. So stick your fingers in your ear for like 10 minutes. I don't know. But the premise is basically Viggo Mortensen's character has been like growing these extra mutant organs in his body. So for some reason, he forms a performance art team with Léa Seydoux' character. And in their live shows, she cuts out those extra mutant organs in front of live audiences. And then there was this added detail of like there's somehow tattooing going on inside on those mutant organs. I didn't really get that. And another thing is that in this world, humans no longer experience pain or sex. So watching these live surgery performance art things is like maybe the only way to feel those sensations. So there's lots of Cronenberg body horror and gore and blood and guts, but it's without the violence because rarely do you see someone being injured against their will. So I don't know, does that count as violence if you're not actually violating someone's will? Something else to notice is how the characters relate to each other throughout the story. Like they'll rarely get upset and they act sort of happy at things that would shock a normal person. For instance, there's a scene where these two women take their clothes off for seemingly no reason, and it's right at the end of a scene. They make a joke to a third woman who turns around to see them. They're naked, and the woman who sees them is simply just kind of amused by the sudden nudity. And nothing really happens, and we move on with the story. I was like, okay, that's another thing that's just happening. So watching this movie is like observing a completely different human culture. Here's another weird example. Viggo Mortensen's character, when he's out in public, wears this black robe and cloak, and all you can see is his eyes. I didn't really pick up on why he's doing that, but I kind of took it as maybe he's famous through his performance art and doesn't want to be recognized, but he pretty much walks around like that and no one seems to mind or call it out. At some point, he goes into a guy's office to meet him and the guy offers to take his coat. And Viggo's like, no, thank you, I get cold. And I'm like, what the heck is with that? I think there would be better ways to stay warm other than walking around dressed like, I don't know, looks like a Sith Lord or something. Also, Viggo's character's coughing and throat clearing, kind of like Neil Hamburger, was a really nice touch throughout the movie. And also there was this thing with a weird chair that he sits in while he's trying to eat. And that was another like WTF out loud moment for me. Would WTF out loud, would that be like WTFOL? Is that a thing? Anyway, I bet you can guess that I gave this film 5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd because I could watch crazy stuff like this all day. So congratulations to David Cronenberg and his crew and his cast on making this masterpiece. Okay, we have some listener questions, so let's get to answering those. First up is a question from Dr. Clownfart, a distinguished member of my Discord server. By the way, if you're not on my Discord server yet, you're missing out. So go to carlkingdom.com and at the top of the site, you'll see a button that says Discord. Click that and follow the directions, and I guess I'll see you inside there. Okay, Dr. Clownfart's question is, can you please discuss any of your time with Ween? Oh, it's actually an interesting question. So back in 2002 or 2003, I think I was living in San Francisco at the time, I was experimenting with all of these like social pranks and stuff like that on the internet. I would go on to Craigslist and also a forum called Pro Sound Web, and I would create these Andy Kaufman or Borat type situations. For instance, I had this back and forth story one time in the music section on Craigslist, where I pretended to be a guy who was fired from a national touring Spin Doctors tribute band. So I went on there and I posted as him, complaining about, what the band did to him. But I also posted as the members of the Spin Doctors tribute band who desperately needed a replacement ASAP to complete their huge tour they were on. And it created this fun drama because people couldn't believe this was unfolding in front of them. And, my trick was to always try to keep it believable. If you made it just too ridiculous, people would see you were joking. So I tried to really make it legit. I would kind of hold back on the ridiculousness. Of course, some people saw through it, and I realized that people enjoyed that sort of thing. So I came up with this idea. Like, what if I pretended that Sir Millard Mulch got kicked out of Ween? So I wrote up like a little journal about it, and I posted it in Ween's MySpace groups and their forums. And it actually took hold. I couldn't believe it. People were sending me angry messages about it, like Ween fans telling me that I deserved to get kicked out after what I did. And I never did deny it or anything like that. So I just kind of let it sit there. And eventually, later it got printed in magazines when I was being interviewed for the How to Sell album. And this was all just a social prank and a funny way to promote myself, because who the heck was I? And I thought, man, what if I had a whole series of these? Around that time, I was reading the Mixerman Chronicles. I don't know if you've ever read that, but look that up. It's about this semi-fictional band called Bitch Slap. And no one really knew if the band was real. I think a lot of people assumed it was real because it was written from the perspective of a supposed recording engineer that was dealing with this nightmare of a major label band, working with this really big name producer, and he would change all the names. So you really felt like you were getting the inside story on this scandalous thing that was happening in Hollywood. And it was pretty cool because back then I was actually experiencing it as he posted the entries every day in real time. And if you've never read that whole thing, the guy's name, he went by the name Mixerman, and he even published the whole thing as a book. Funny coincidence is that one of my co-writers on the How to Sell album actually has a blurb on the back of the jacket, like reviewing it and recommending it. So that was pretty cool. So I guess inspired by that, I thought, what if Sir Millard Mulch is a semi-fictional session musician who goes around getting kicked out of famous bands? Honestly, the concept was pretty hilarious to me, because if I couldn't get well-known or get attention for being, successful in bands, maybe I could get people's attention from getting thrown out of them, or not even really getting thrown out of them, pretending to being thrown out of them. So I started with Ween, and that went pretty well. And I was going to write up a second episode where Les Claypool fired me, but I'm not even sure if I ever got around to doing that. Anyway, here's the original Ween post. I dug this up, and I'll read it to you here. You can also find it on my website. It's been up there forever. And I'll post the link in the show notes. Here we go. Well, my gig as a backup keyboardist for Ween came to an abrupt end tonight. They kept getting pissed because I was noodling out my tunes in between sets and getting the audience too distracted. And get this, I kept jumping around pretending to play solos on my Apple keyboard with the USB cable flying all over the place, at one point popping Mickey in the eye. Every time Mickey or Aaron would say, "We're Ween," I would say, "And I'm Sir Millard Mulch." And when they'd say, "This song is blah 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 by Ween," I would say, "And Sir Millard Mulch is playing keyboards on it." At first they thought it was cute, like the first time, but I kept the joke going too long and really pissed them off. I kept jumping in front of them and dancing around with the Apple keyboard and throwing Sir Millard Mulch discs at cute girls. It was fun while it lasted. Not my fault if these guys don't have a sense of humor. At least I still get my 2 weeks of rehearsal salary. which I haven't spent yet. Luckily, they sent me home after only one day to try and find another apartment. My girlfriend is going to be bummed because she was getting like 13 of her friends into the show in Chicago, because that's where she's from. So I'm sitting here in the hotel, and I'm heading back to California tomorrow on a Greyhound at noon. It's a 2.5-day trip, but I don't mind. I like to look out the window, and it's better than flying. I tried to convince them to reimburse me for renting a car, but they just gave me a dirty look. I figured I could see a few friends on the way if I drove, but too bad. And that was the end of the little Ween Journal. Thanks for asking that question, Dr. Clown Fart. That was a fun opportunity to tell that story. All right, this next question was submitted by Serious Musician Ponytail 83. Wow, Serious Musician Ponytail 83 asks, why do you use Cubase? Why not Logic or Pro Tools? Well, Serious Musician Ponytail 83, I have a pretty simple answer to that. I guess it's really for two reasons. The most basic is it's the DAW, or Digital Audio Workstation. For those who don't know what a DAW is, it's the program that you use for recording music on your computer. I'm using Cubase right now to record this podcast. Anyway, I have been on Cubase exclusively for 30 years now, so I'm very comfortable with it, and it does absolutely everything I need. And second reason, and this is why I don't stop using Cubase, is its capability for MIDI tuplets. If you open up the piano roll screen, or some will call it the edit window, or maybe the part edit window, you can easily divide the grid by any number, like 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 6, or 7, etc. And, I have no idea how high that number could go because I've never bothered to find out. Maybe I'll do that soon. Anyway, that means that I can take any measure or beat, or any space, I guess, and divide it by any number I can think of. Like I can divide a beat by 13, and the next beat can then be divided by 17, or 5, or 12, or anything I come up with. So it makes it super easy to compose in those odd tuplets and weird rhythms that you hear in a lot of the music of Sir Millard Mulch or Dr. Zoltan or whatever. Now, I did take a Berklee class on Logic a few years ago. I actually made a mistake and signed up for the wrong class. And I did find Logic a little bit frustrating. Overall, it was good, but it lacked those MIDI tuplets. So when I wanted to do a 5-tuplet, I would need to just enter 5 regular quarter notes, and then I had to do this weird stretching on the whole MIDI part to get it to fit in the space of 4, which is going way out of the way to try to do a simple thing. But I have to say, Logic did have some other cool features, like its MIDI to notation function. Sure seems solid. Like you could enter in some MIDI and then click on the little notation window and boom, it looked good. And another thing is that it had this pretty great swing groove slider for adding various amounts of swing to a drum beat. Like you could easily find a blend between straight and swung and adjust the amount of swing according to your tastes. Like if you only want it to swing a little bit, you could do that. Or if you want it to be really swung, you could do that. And Cubase might have something like that as well, but with Logic, it was super easy to do, having that nifty little slider. I think if for some reason I couldn't use Cubase anymore, I'd probably just move over to Logic and deal with it. And I would assume that at some point Logic, if they haven't already, they would add in a better tuplet function. Back when I was taking that Logic class for my final project, I did actually record just one song for it. And it's one of my Patreon exclusives called Shit. Yeah, it's a song called Shit. And you can find it in my Patreon if you search for it. Other than that, I pretty much plan to stick with Cubase forever. I actually used to have an endorsement deal with them back in 2001 when I released the Sir Millard Mulch De-Evolution of Yasmin Bleeth CD. But at some point, I totally lost contact with the A&R guy or whatever. I should probably get that going again. Anyway, thank you, Serious Musician Ponytail 83. Good question. And keep it serious with that ponytail, okay? And question number 3, this one is also from the esteemed Dr. Clownfart. His question is, or maybe her question, because Dr. Clownfart could be female. We never know. If money was no object, what would you be doing? Okay, I'll try to answer that. In a purely, creative work context, I think I would definitely be producing an Adult Swim cartoon like Mike Tyson Mysteries. I don't know if anyone listening has seen that show. Please go watch it because I think it's just perfect. It's got that absurd, classic Adult Swim style. The plots are crazy. The acting is just great. And it's possibly my favorite of all time. It's hard to say. It's either that or Harvey Birdman. But I also wonder, if I got the chance to work in the animation industry at like an animation studio, maybe after having that job, I wouldn't actually enjoy it because of all the pressure and working with a bunch of people and teams and hierarchy. It would probably just stress me out too much. But I guess within the context of this question, if I were producing it out of my own studio with unlimited money, then I could probably just run the production process however I want and only talk to the people I want to talk to. And that got me thinking, out of everything that I do, I think writing is my favorite thing for my temperament. Just sitting quietly somewhere with my laptop. There's not video cameras everywhere. There's not a bunch of equipment and data and hard drives. It's just such a relieving thing. And I think that sitting around typing on a laptop, that's like a good lifestyle for me. Or a good lifestyle for Carl King, one of the two. Anyway, thank you for your questions, Dr. Clownfart. And also thank you to Serious Musician Ponytail83 for sending in his or her question. Now let's do a special segment called Eric Alexander Moore Tweets. Who the heck is Alexander Moore, and why should I care if he tweets? Well, Eric Alexander Moore is a comedian and writer friend of mine, and I follow him on Twitter, and I just always find myself laughing out loud at his tweets. He's this extraordinarily funny thinker, and he also happens to be the transcriptionist for this podcast, so if you read my podcast with your eyes on my blog at carlkingdom.com, it was often made possible by him typing with his fingers. I honestly don't know if he types with his fingers. Maybe he doesn't. By the way, he's the one who came up with the skillet joke about John Cooper screaming, "Kill myself!" instead of "Cooper stuff!" So he deserves all the credit for that. And credit has now officially been given. Okay, back on the topic of this segment, I thought, hey, why don't I share some of my favorite recent Eric Alexander Moore Twitter tweets on the Carl King podcast? So here are 3 of them. Number 1, I get bummed when I find out a venue has a state-of-the-art sound system. The bands I like aren't actually that talented. I don't want to perfectly hear every note they play. Kind of like how jazz is about the notes they don't play, rock is about the mistakes you don't hear. And insert laughter, and we'll now move on to tweet number 2. Nothing like accidentally burning your breakfast while trying to retrieve your green, reusable AeroPress coffee filter out from the garbage while thinking about how Taylor Swift releases more CO2 in a single hot girl summer of private jet rides than you will in 500 lifetimes. Whew, that is a long one. And I don't know, what is a hot girl summer anyway? I've seen someone use that phrase before. I'm like, what the heck is that? But anyway, I really like that because it's so specific and complicated. He's got these green reusable AeroPress coffee filters. And then he's thinking about Taylor Swift and the hot girl summer and the private jet rides. It's like, wow, there's a lot going on there. Okay, let's move on to number 3. We should pick a red state and let it do a trial secession where it becomes its own country and therefore has to go the next 5 years without access to blue state tax revenue. Everyone will leave, you say. Ha, no, we are building a wall. I don't know how well comedy tweets translate into a podcast format, but there you go. Anyway, I also suggest you check out this odd thing he wrote recently called, now this is a complicated one too, Inside You Are 12 Cats Feasting on the Corpse of Their Former Owner. And I don't know, this is some kind of a reference to a thing about inside you are two something or others, two cats or two lions. I don't know. But he explains it like this. These are his words. I'm trying this thing that I'm calling improvised flash fiction, where I start telling a story one tweet at a time without any plan for where it's going to go. The added pressure of it being public and unfolding in real time is fun and nerve-wracking. Then I try to wrap it up in under 20 or so tweets. Anyway, I found it a pretty screwed up read. So, yeah. Inside You Are 12 Cats Feasting on the Corpse of Their Former Owner. And you can read that on Medium. I am putting the link in the show notes. He's always insightful, always taking a chance. I recommend you follow Eric Alexander Moore on Twitter. His username is _Eric_Alexander. And with that, we will move on to this episode's feature segment. Today, I want to share my thoughts on how I conquered my anger. Now, I'm not talking about just losing your temper or getting in an argument with someone. Those are short-term situational things that we all experience. I mean, personally, I tend to get mad at technology as if it's intentionally malfunctioning. You know, lots of cussing at my computer, you stupid effing piece of S. And as I said, that's like a different kind of thing. I'm talking about a specific brand of this deeper, judgmental anger I carried around for nearly 20 years. It was long-term and competitive, and I was consumed by it for sure. So yeah, I've been in therapy, I've read books, and I've worked pretty darn hard to get over it. And here's what I learned. A little bit of background. Much of my anger was somehow related to status and intelligence, because I come from a blue-collar background, and I grew up with feelings that I wasn't as good as other people, or that I wasn't as smart as them, and I definitely lacked a lot of social skills, and I was kind of in a shell. I was this quiet and odd kid. And I think somehow that made people assume I wasn't intelligent. You know, like when it was time for me to go out into the adult world and support myself, or at least try to, I ended up in a lot of these low-paying retail jobs, like being talked down to by the managers. But I saw other people around me getting along just fine. Like they went off to college, and they bought houses and cars and had kids, and somehow that made me really angry. Like, why weren't they having the social problems I had? And not only was I somehow envious, I also couldn't understand why they even wanted those things in the first place. Like, who wants that kind of boring, materialistic, predictable life? I guess it was this weird thing of being unhappy that they weren't unhappy. So I found a way to express all of that through a sort of creative satire. I made up these characters who could say the things I was afraid to say, like Sir Millard Mulch, Ed Furniture, Dr. Zoltan, other weird fake names. And I basically posed as this superior being. And I wrote songs making fun of quote unquote stupid people. And as goofy as all of it was, you know, my music and essays and videos actually had a serious source. Like they were driven by my deep irritability. But here's what I eventually realized, that my anger was just fear wearing a mask. All right, let me repeat that. My anger was fear wearing a mask. So whenever I get angry, it's actually because I'm afraid or feel threatened. So the initial feeling that arises is fear, and very quickly that is masked by anger. That means that when I'm mad at someone, it means deep down that probably I feel threatened by them. It's like my anger is hiding this subconscious feeling of weakness, that I'm losing and they're winning. So it's like my ego is protecting itself. It's this defense mechanism. So all those years of being angry and writing essays about bands is because I probably felt threatened by them. And that's tough to admit, but it's true. I don't think it was hard for most people to figure that out about me, but it took me a long time. Now, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've found that most conflicts I have with people are actually just in my head. And I don't mean the people are in my head. I mean, I'm imagining arguing with people, going through all of the steps and all of the gotchas and all the excuses and all the counter moves. And if I say this, are they going to say that? And it's crazy because these people are not even there and they're not even arguing with me. And they're definitely not affecting my life in any real physical way. So I'm just making myself angry in my imagination. So starting as a teenager, I spent a lot of time frustrated with the other people around me. Like, why aren't they as smart as me? And of course, all someone had to do to be smart in my world was listen to Mr. Bungle. Because I was ranking people along a single dimension, like this single musical choice. But I think that's what we do all the time along other dimensions that are just as silly. And by this point in my life, I know that I'm far from being a superior form of intelligence. And maybe back then I didn't know that. I developed this everyone is stupid but me attitude, which was highly addictive. I'd go around looking for any sign that someone was stupid. And I got some kind of twisted sense of superiority out of it, even though all it did was make my life worse. The problem is that person who might seem stupider than me in one context, it's likely that they're smarter than me in another. But even if they're not, why would that make me mad? It's like if someone took an IQ test, got a low score, why would that make you angry? Because we're all going to have different IQs, and at the very least, someone who's smart should be thankful they were born with more intelligence. Like, that should be a good thing. And I've also realized it shouldn't bother me that someone else is making a mistake. Because in most cases, mistakes are gonna get fixed. Maybe it takes some more effort, but that's just the way life goes. Some people are like those Coke machines that keep spitting the dollar back out. Like, no matter how many times you flip the dollar around and try it on a different side. Maybe it takes like 5 times and then it works. And then you can just, go on with your day. It's hard to remember, but I try not to be emotionally tormented just because something took a little longer than I expected. And hey, I'm looking at you, TuneCore. Anyway, of course, sometimes it's, beyond someone just making a simple mistake. Because sometimes people really do have bad intentions. They'll go out of their way to hurt others, but I don't think most people do that. If they did, civilization would have collapsed a long time ago. I don't think we would have gotten this far cooperating all these hundreds of thousands of years. It even goes back before that because it's a mammal thing. And in some other cases, people just have incorrect beliefs, but I think it's better to go into the world accepting that rather than being shocked every time. People think nutty things. Well, what a surprise. It's probably on me to be prepared for that. And let's say you criticize someone's lifestyle. Could someone else with an even better lifestyle or a superior lifestyle also criticize yours? Like, for every person that you think is stupid, is there another person above you thinking you're stupid? I think it is likely. Someone out there right now probably thinks that about me and about you. Oh no. Because are you making perfect choices in every area of your life? Are you this flawless being? Or if you took an honest look, are you just as troubled and flawed as anyone else? Like, let's look at your diet or your exercise. How are those abs looking? Why haven't you figured that out, you idiot? Anyone can do crunches. And if you're not doing them, you're just stupid, right? Oh, and how's that inner peace doing? Because if you're so great and you're so smart, why don't you meditate? Why aren't you happy every day? Is it maybe because you blame someone else for your problems? Well, haven't you figured out you shouldn't do that? Like anyone, I can get annoyed by the things around me. But, as an introvert, I'm extremely sensitive to loud sounds. So I have a knee-jerk reaction to people with loud cars or motorcycles, as I've said in previous episodes of this podcast. But here's what's tough for me to accept, and I'm working on it. People do these things simply because they feel good. Yes, that's right. A Republican who wears his sunglasses on the top of his baseball hat while revving his loud truck covered in Trump flags, he's experiencing the same thing as me when I furminate my cat, or read a business book, or go on a hike in the hills with my wife. I'm pretty sure that our experiences are entirely made up of chemicals in our brains. We do the things that release those pleasurable chemicals. For some people, something that you might find obnoxious is the only way for them to get those chemicals. And some of them thrive off of adrenaline. Like they get this great feeling out of acting macho, or out of being wild and crazy and jumping off of things. And Carl King does not. I just like my peace and quiet. Now, here's a practical point, and it might be my favorite. I think it's a total waste of time and energy to be angry. Derek Sivers posted a quote from Seneca, and it stuck with me. It's a stoicism thing, and it goes like this. Quote, "The key to having a good life is to value things that are genuinely valuable and be indifferent to things that lack value. Any time and energy spent on events you can't control will have no effect on the outcome of events and will therefore be wasted time and energy." All right, I have to pause and briefly admit that this very podcast, made by a bearded white male, has officially jumped the shark by saying the word stoicism a moment ago. So now I guess all I need are some Bitcoins and a Tesla. But seriously, that Seneca quote is pretty much the same as the Serenity Prayer. And it goes along with this belief that I have that unless you're in a physical fight, or protecting someone from violence, or transforming your anger into positive action, it's completely useless. So let me just repeat the second sentence in the Seneca quote because it should definitely be a sign stuck on my wall. Quote, "Any time and energy spent on events you can't control will have no effect on the outcome of events and will therefore be wasted time and energy." I really believe that being angry is as useful as digging a hole and putting the dirt back in for no reason all day long. It's, Sisyphean or however you want to pronounce it. I'm pretty sure at this point that no amount of being angry will make your life better. Like, there's no way it's going to help you. It won't change the world, and it doesn't matter how angry you get. Like, you can measure it if you want. You can try being twice as angry, or 10 times as angry, or 100 times as angry, and you will get the same non-result. That right there should prove to you that anger doesn't do anything. Of course, in the meantime, you're only hurting your own body and your mind, flooding them with stress hormones that do real damage. You've got increased fat storage, lowered immune response, inflammation, heart attack, strokes, just dying sooner in general. And anger definitely doesn't hurt the people you're angry at. It only hurts you. Sitting there being angry all day is like punching yourself in the face over and over. Kind of crazy if you think of it that way. Like, why would you do that? You'll have to excuse me. I've got to go over here and inject some stress hormones into my body. Give myself a chronic disease, see if that fixes the problem. Eckhart Tolle, or is it Tolle or Toll, he writes about a concept called the pain body. And I think he believes it's a real thing, but I really like it as a metaphor. The pain body is a way to personify these feelings like anger and to explain how it behaves. So his concept is this. There's this sort of energetic body inside of you, and it wants nothing but for you to be in pain. It does nothing but feed off of that misery. And of course, it doesn't want you to be less unhappy because that would kill the pain body. And it'll come up with all sorts of excuses to stay alive, just making you more upset. It's like it takes over your brain. Eckhart Tolle says, the pain body pretends to be the person. So it'll use, pretty much any resource available to amplify any bad feelings you have. It's like a brilliant Sith Lord. And I think that's the second Sith Lord reference in this episode. Anyway, another word for pain body might be the ego. Speaking of the ego, I've also found benefits in Buddhism. There's this idea that we're all suffering, and I get that. I think deep down we're all the same idiot suffering for different external reasons. But, the same core reason. And I guess if you want to know that reason, I don't know, go to Buddhism.com or wherever. I don't have a link to it, so no show notes on that one. I'm going to wrap up this segment by telling you 3 beliefs that help me. And they might sound dark, and in the wrong hands, they might seem depressing or nihilistic. And to be honest, I don't even really know what nihilism is, except that the dude says that it must be exhausting. But these 3 beliefs seriously make me feel better, and maybe they'll work for you. Belief number 1, we have no free will. Sam Harris says that, quote, it's not merely that free will is an illusion, the illusion of free will is an illusion. And I don't know what that means, but here's what makes sense to me. If everything, all of the particles and energy in the universe started with the Big Bang, then everything was set in motion from that instant, right? And so all of our thoughts must also be made out of those particles. If they are, they started moving about 13.7 billion years ago, kind of like pool balls. So those pool balls were scattered, and they're still just bouncing around billions of years later. We don't control them at all, because everything about us, including our thoughts, are just made out of those. It's like we are the pool balls. So every feeling that I have, every behavior, it's all just a movie playing on an old tape. And even our DNA is part of the script. So if I scratch my head, that behavior wasn't actually mine. I didn't start it. If everything is causality, it was set in motion by the Big Bang. But hey, what caused the Big Bang? I have no idea. Maybe the universe explodes and implodes repeatedly into infinity. Or maybe when it gets to a certain point of explosion, it implodes back into itself and time all runs backwards. But that's probably for someone else's podcast conversation. Anyway, back to the free will thing. So we're all sitting here watching a pre-recorded movie, and we think that we are actually the characters in that movie. Like, we think we can make choices or change the plot. But as real as the movie seems, we're only just sitting here watching it, entirely helpless. And somehow this is a massive relief to me. But of course, my relief is all part of the movie too. It just helps me to look at people I would otherwise not like as absurd movie characters. Because, they didn't create themselves or choose the way they are any more than I did. And could I be wrong about all of this? Of course I could be. But it sure does help me with my frustration. Belief number 2, humans are cockroaches consuming the earth. Wow. What a belief. So yeah, I do think this is true, and that there's nothing we can do about it. It's like we're just feasting on the cake. And we're all doing it. We're no different. It's, easy to point the finger at those bad people who are destroying the planet, but we all are. I think that from the Earth's perspective, we're all just pure evil. And unlike bees, humans serve no purpose to the ecosystem. So we're pretty much like a disease. Kind of like Agent Smith said in The Matrix. And anyway, how are we going to convince 7 billion people to stop being exactly what we are? It's like expecting sharks to stop being sharks. By the way, we love to project evil on the animals in the wild, like sharks. And we put them in horror movies, but hey, all they're doing is eating just like we are. Jim Rohn said something like, well, that's why we call them liars, because they lie. What else do you expect them to do? Belief number 3. Nothing ultimately matters because eventually the sun will explode and the universe might expand so far that it dissipates into nothingness. And That's called the ultimate fate of the universe, and it's a real thing. It's even got its own Wikipedia page. You can go read it. I'm putting a link to it in the show notes. Now, these things don't make me happy, of course. It's just that they relieve the petty anger that I have at other people. And maybe since really bad things are going to happen far beyond what any specific humans can do, I accept that it's pretty pointless to sit around mad. It helps me to stop pointing the finger and stop imagining enemies, or casting people as villains in my personal movie. And yeah, as I said, some of those three things, like not having any free will, humans are eating the earth, and the universe might end, could seem pretty dark. And you might think, well, Carl King, if nothing matters, why don't we just do anything we want? Why don't I go out and do a bunch of bad stuff? Well, we don't have time to delve into the ethics and morality and why you should be good to other people, but I'm just going to say, you should do that. Care about your friends and family, care about strangers, be nice, make the world around you better. I know it's a cliche, but we're only here for a short time. Here's another news segment I'd like to share with you this week. My good friend and collaborator Chewbode. Hey, Chewbode is back. He has submitted the first installment of an ongoing fantasy story called Lux. That's spelled Lux. And I am going to read it to you. And this is part 1. There was no way his eyes would adjust anymore. After standing in one spot for what seemed to be an eternity, Kantao realized that the darkness in the tunnel was all-consuming. It was surely created by magic, and he was confident that if he cast any spell now, it would dissipate instantly, and he would have wasted what little energy he had left. He steadied his breathing. Even though he could see nothing, he closed his eyes to gain higher precision with his other senses. Yes, there we go, he thought to himself, as he focused on the faint echo of slowly dripping water coming from ahead. He took a step, and his battle-beaten body reminded him of the fracture he had on his ankle. And even though he didn't wince audibly, he was sure his face was showing the pain. Well, if anyone could see his face right now. As he progressed down the tunnel, he withstood the urge to reach out to his side to feel the walls. He knew that the tunnel was made of damp, sometimes mossy stone by the way it felt under his boots. And by his own sounds lightly bouncing off the walls, he could tell there wasn't a lot of room to maneuver. Maybe a meter to the left and right. Not ideal for drawing his sword, if it came to that. Ah, wait. He stopped walking and his ears opened up. He was at a junction point. Left, right, and forward. He turned his face side to side and then down to the floor. Kantao quickly realized that he could use this to his advantage and reached to his belt, where he retrieved a cinched pouch. Yes, there was the calzamite. He could feel how lumpy and crumbly it was, even through the leather hide. He stopped and strained his ears again. There were new sounds. Not close and not loud, but there was something down these corridors. Scurrying sounds, maybe? Definitely breathing. He thrust his hand in the pouch, and with his arm outstretched to the right, he pirouetted around while releasing the calzamite. As it hit the ground, it started to emit a pale, ghostly blue light. And as he came back around to his initial position, he could see that the circle he just deposited perfectly touched each of the 4 corners of the intersection's walls. Il supportante thai rai effort usium desal. The words quietly left his lips. And immediately the dim dust circle brightened by 100-fold, forcing Kantao to throw his forearm over his eyes and drop to one knee. After a moment, he could feel that the protection spell had fully cast, and he was able to slowly peer out from behind his robed arm. The darkness had lifted, but his eyes took a moment to adjust. As soon as his sight returned, he wished it hadn't. Outside the circle, to the left, right, ahead, and back from where he had come, Kantao saw something he hoped to never see again in his life. pure evil. Well, that's some spooky stuff. Listen in next week to find out what exactly is that pure evil. Now, let's wrap up this episode with the musical artist of the week. This week's musical artist of the week is Igorrr. Igorrr. That's right, like Stravinsky, but 3 R's at the end. Igorrr. I don't know if it's supposed to be pronounced like that, but I think being a little bit confused is the point. I remember this band because they were recommended to me by Mike Stone, and we actually wrote a blog together last year called Mike Stone Forces Carl King to Listen to His Favorite Metal Bands. And you can find that on carlkingdom.com. Just search for it and it'll pop up. I'll also put the direct link in my show notes. Anyway, this week, Dr. Clownfart posted a song called Chevelle inside my Discord. And if you haven't joined my Discord yet, this is the kind of thing you're missing out on. So thank you to Dr. Clownfart for the submission. Igorrr is an alias of a guy named Gautier Serre, a French person. He's a sort of composer. And Mike Stone assured me that Gautier can be seen playing guitar in the video, and he has an unusually shaped and textured guitar. That's all I know. The song title is French for horse, and it's pronounced kind of like Chevelle, with a sustained L. I can't quite do it. Chevelle. It's a tough one, especially if you don't speak Frenchian. I'm guessing it's probably related to the words cavalry and cavalier. Chevelle is, I think I almost got it that time, is from the Savage Sinusoid album, which is quite an eclectic recording from 2017, released by Metal Blade Records. And if you like variety and extremes, Savage Sinusoid is for you. This particular song has lots of complicated metal, but also a button accordion. Yeah, that's right, a button accordion. And that is a really mysterious instrument. I saw one of the guys in Farmer's Market play one at a live show in like 2003 or so. I think it was at the Starry Plow in Oakland. And boy, could that guy shred. Whatever happened to that guy? Is this the same guy? I don't know. Probably not. If you've never seen one of these button accordions before, a typical accordion has piano-like keys. You know, the black and white things. Well, this wild thing has multiple rows of little round buttons like an old-timey cash register or a typewriter. So it's got like 5 rows of those buttons, which I understand makes it chromatic, but beyond that, I have no understanding of how the notes are laid out. I don't know, maybe it's similar to how a guitar is laid out with multiple strings. I saw in the video that the bassist has an open-handed style where he plucks with both his thumb and his fingers, and I've never had any luck with that thumb plucking. Just can't get a consistent tone from it. My thumb sounds drastically different from my fingers. So I'll just stick with my green Dunlop Tortex plectrums, 0.88 millimeter. Chevelle also has sections of beautiful operatic female vocals. It's a striking contrast to all that nonsensical male screaming. The drummer is, of course, quite technical, and the drum fills are mixed in this mechanical, triggery way that you would expect from this genre. And that brings us to the time signature. You could count this song in a couple of different ways, either in an up-tempo 3/4 or a tempo half that speed but 6/8. But because of the European melody and chords, I would go with the fast 3/4. You know, it's got that kind of pa, but very fast feel, even though the drummer is playing what would really be considered a 6/8 pattern. It's all just fine musicianship throughout. Carl King has no complaints. The YouTube video has 2.7 million views, so I'm definitely not the first person to be impressed by them. But if you were going to watch this video, you should be prepared for some tomfoolery. Just be careful because they do employ absurdity. And there's a large tradition of this in metal music, and I don't know why that is. You know, metal bands either take themselves way too seriously, or they write songs about horses in French. Anyway, look up Igorrr somewhere on the internet. I'm posting a YouTube link to this specific video, Chewbode, in the show notes. Okay, that's it for this episode of the Carl King Podcast. Remember to support this show by joining me on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Carl King. And thank you again to my $50 patrons, Chewbode and Hank Howard III. And thank you to all of the listeners for listening. If you get a moment, let me know what you think of this episode. Leave a comment on YouTube, or, just write me a nice review on Apple Podcasts, because, hey, I want to hear from you. You can also email me at show@carlkingdom.com. Carl King will clairvoyantly see you in the next episode, and until then, have a great week.